Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 14th October 2025, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which have featured in today's newspaper. The handout of this very discussion is available in the comment section below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try and understand that what all steps the Indian Railway has taken in order to meet its goal of net zero carbon emission by 2030. What all challenges we are witnessing with respect to the same, and what more needs to be done in order to effectively realize the idea of decarbonizing Indian railways. Moving on to the second topic, herein firstly we'll try and understand that what do we mean by the term missing woman, why when it comes to the Indian society we are witnessing a skewed sex ratio at birth, and what all steps the government has taken in this respect. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issue in the most simple manner possible. And we'll also be doing value addition which would be relevant from prelims perspective. So stay tuned. So now beginning with the first topic, which is talking about the green transition when it comes to the Indian Railways. This particular topic we can associate with GS paper 3, infrastructure, and therein we have railways. So the write-up has appeared in The Hindu, wherein the writer is talking about the successful trial of India's first hydrogen-powered coach at the Integral Coach Factory in July 2025 this year. This is a remarkable step when it comes to Indian Railways transition towards green economy. Now, first thing that we need to understand is what target Indian Railway has set for itself when it comes to transition towards green economy. So, Indian Railway has set a target for itself that it would be attaining net zero carbon emission by 2030, which is 4 decades ahead of the national target. Nationally, what we have determined that we would be achieving net zero carbon emission by 2070. But Indian Railway has set a target that it would be achieving it by 2030. Now, the first thing that I want you people to tell me that what do you understand by net zero carbon emission? Does that mean that we'll stop, emitting carbon dioxide at all? The answer is no. Net zero carbon emission, for the people who are new to this session, net zero carbon emission basically implies that the amount of carbon dioxide emission that we are making, okay, same amount of carbon dioxide needs to be removed from the atmosphere. Okay, so the amount of carbon dioxide emission that I am making should equal to the amount of carbon dioxide that I am removing from the atmosphere. Okay, and how do I do this? By reducing the emission also. Okay, that's one way. Other way is by creating carbon sinks. For example, afforestation. Okay, creating forest. Forest naturally removes the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Or we can use the innovative technology, that is carbon capture and utilization and storage technologies. Okay. So through these mechanisms, we can actually realize the idea of net zero carbon emissions. Now, why it is important for the Indian Railways to realize this particular goal? Because you need to understand that when it comes to Indian Railways, we have 24 million passenger trains and 3 million tons freight of is carried out through railways. So it is very important that we decarbonize the Indian Railways. That would be helping us to meet the nationally determined contribution also when it comes to at the national level. Okay, and if the Indian Railways is able to meet this particular goal of net zero carbon emission by 2030, the writer has pointed out that it would enable us to prevent 60 million tons of annual carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, it would enable us to reduce the carbon dioxide emission to this level, which would be equivalent to taking 13 million cars off the road. So now I think you are clear with this thing that why realization of this particular target is essential, okay, at the national level also. Now let's just have a look that what all steps the Indian Railway has taken in order to meet this particular target which it has set for itself. So first and foremost, we have electrified, okay, majority of the railway network. Roughly 98% of the railway network is electrified. So we are no more dependent upon the diesel powered trains. So that would enable us to reduce our carbon footprint, and this is also going to reduce our import dependence when it comes to diesels. So it is a win-win situation from both the angles. Then we have put in place large scale renewable projects also. roughly 756 megawatt of renewable energy has been put in place, okay, at the railway stations, in railway buildings also. So more than 2000 railway station and service building are now powered by solar energy. And when you talk about the railway building of Northeastern Frontier Zone, it has also got the Bureau of Energy Efficiency Shunya Net Zero label. When a particular building get this particular label, Shunya Net Zero label, when the amount of renewable energy that building is producing is equivalent to the amount of energy that building is consuming. Okay, the people living in that building are consuming. And another advanced label is Shunya Plus label, wherein the building is producing more amount of renewable energy than what is being consumed by the people living in that particular building. Okay, so we have made great advancement when it comes to renewable energy projects in the railway stations and in the railway buildings also. Then we have, operationalized majority of the dedicated freight corridors. We have 2 dedicated freight corridors. Okay, the eastern dedicated freight corridor is going to connect Ludhiana with Sonnagar of Bihar. And when you talk about the western dedicated freight corridor, it is going to connect this Jawaharlal Nehru Port Terminal with the Dadri in UP. Why we have put in place this dedicated freight corridor? Majority of this is already operational, so that we can make sure that when it comes to transportation of cargo, instead of relying on the road transportation, we should rely more on the railways. Okay, because railways can, travel a long distance, and now since we have electrified majority of the railway networks, so our carbon footprint would be less as compared to, transporting the cargo by using diesel powered trucks. Okay, so that is the reason the government came up with this dedicated freight corridor. This is one reason. Another reason being, why have we created a dedicated, corridor for carrying the cargoes? Because when you look at the railway network, it is overburdened with the passenger trains. Okay, so whenever passenger train would be late, obviously the railway staff would be giving the passenger train a go away. Okay, so the transit time for the trains which are carrying the cargo is, greater. So in order to address this thing, in order to reduce the transit time, stoppage time when it comes to the trains which are carrying the cargo, that is another reason why we came up with this dedicated freight corridor. So as the transit time would be less, we have a dedicated corridor to transport the cargo. So reliance would be more on the railway transportation, and that's how we are going to reduce the carbon footprint in this respect. Then the Indian Railway has also came up with the water policy in 2017, wherein it is giving due emphasis on improving water use efficiency. And how we can improve the water use efficiency? By using it again and again. Okay, for this it has put in place waste recycle, plants on the vacant railway lands at various railway stations. Then in order to give a further boost to renewable, energy generation, the Indian Railway Finance Corporation has extended 7,500 crore worth loan to the NTPC Green Energy, so that more renewable energy projects could be put in place, and the Indian Railway should be powered by green and green energy only. Then when it comes to improving the railway infrastructure and improving the track utilization when it comes to the trains which are transporting the cargo, we had rail logistic project in 2022, wherein the World Bank gave us loan, okay, which is basically aimed at enhancing the rail freight infrastructure and decongesting the corridors, so that the transit time for passenger rails as well as the trains which are carrying the cargo should be less. Because when the transit time would be less, the train would be consuming less amount of energy. Okay, that's how we will be reducing our carbon footprint. Then we have also focused upon creating additional carbon sink. Okay, so the Indian Railways has given due emphasis on afforestation also. For this, it has collaborated with the forest department of respective states, and it has carried out the plantation exercise. So since 2017 till 2021-22, 1 lakh crore plants have been planted already with the help of forest department of the respective states. And this plantation is basically done on whatever vacant land which is there with the railways, and the the space which is available between the tracks and around the railway stations. Then in order to realize this idea of green economy, the Indian Railways have put in place a policy since 2016 that whatever work it is going to carry out, whatever money it is going to allocate for any particular work, all the works, okay, 1% of the total money being allocated would be used for environmental related works, okay. And lastly, going in alignment with the mission of Swachh Bharat mission, the Indian Railway has put in place environment-friendly bio-toilets in the passenger coaches. And that's how it is going to reduce its waste generation also. Okay. So, these bio-toilets have been developed by Indian Railways collaborating with the DRDO. And till March 2021, these many bio-toilets have been put in place in these many coaches. Now, having understood the different initiatives taken by the Indian Railway, realizing its goal of net zero carbon emission by 2030, what all challenges are still there which the Indian Railways need to take into account? First and foremost, although right now we have electrified more than 90% of the railway tracks that is there, but what if the electricity is coming from coal-powered plants and not from renewable energy? So that is something that we need to look into. Just mere electrification of the tracks is not an indicator that we have actually realized the idea of green economy. For this, we also need to make sure that the energy which we are using, okay, that should be coming from renewable sources only. Then, in this push of electrification of the railway tracks, what we have witnessed is wastage of public money. How come? Roughly 700, okay, more than 700 diesel-powered locomotives, which are still, in working condition, they have become redundant. So the money that we invested, okay, in buying and, creating these diesel-powered locomotives, that has gone, to waste. So this electrification drive has not taken into account this financial wastage. Then, when it comes to Indian Railways, it has yet not emerged as multimodal green hubs. In order to do that, we need to make sure that the Indian Railways are very well connected with other, greener modes of transportation like electric buses, like bicycles, like EV, rickshaws, etc. So that is not happening currently. Then another challenge is when it comes to hydrogen-powered locomotives. It is a good step if you look at from the climate perspective. But in order to, adjust the hydrogen-powered locomotives in the already electrified track, the government would have to do additional expenditure when it comes to production, storage and refueling infrastructure when it comes to hydrogen. And plus, additional cost would have to be borne by the government. Why? Because of the highly flammable nature of hydrogen. So because of this thing, strict safety protocols needs to be put in place, adequate infrastructure needs to be put in place and adequate training needs to be provided to the railway personnel that is there. Okay, so that is going to increase the financial burden of the government. Then it's good that we are taking a lot of initiative, okay, making a transition towards green economy. But you also need to make sure that the railway infrastructure that we are putting in place is resilient to the extreme climatic events that we are witnessing. But sadly, that is not happening currently. So the recent, increase or heavy rainfall that we witnessed in Kerala, that disrupted the railway infrastructure. So the railway infrastructure is not resilient to the extreme climate events. Now in this respect, let's just understand that what more steps needs to be taken so that we can realize the idea of decarbonizing Indian Railways. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the electrified railway tracks, okay, which we have already put in place, it is a marvelous achievement. But addition to that, we also need to make sure that the energy that we are using, it should be renewable energy. Okay, so we need to make sure that green trains are actually powered by green energy. Only then we would be able to make sure that the emission reductions are actually in reality, not just notional. Okay. Then we need to make sure that railways emerge as multimodal green hubs. For that, we need to connect it with the cleaner transportation modes, okay, like the electric buses, the e-rickshaws, bicycle sharing networks, etc. Then we need to make sure efficient use of technology. Herein we can use artificial intelligence to ensure optimal utilization of the energy. So what artificial intelligence would do, it would look into the track gradient, it would take into account the number of passengers which are there. And let's suppose if the train has to go down, okay, this is the gradient. So AI would, monitor all these things, and we would be using regenerative braking to basically store the energy. So we need to use the advanced technology to further optimize our energy utilization and to improve the operational efficiency. Then we need to incentivize behavioral change. Change should come from the public. So what we can do green certification of the trains. If we do the green certification of the trains, we as customers would be incentivized to book the tickets of that particular train, because then we'll be thinking that we are also contributing to reduction of the CO2 emissions. Okay, then we need to do carbon labeling of freight services, and we need to carry out public awareness campaigns also in this respect, okay, making it a social movement. And lastly, we need to make sure that the railway infrastructure is climate resilient. So for that, what we can do, we can elevate the railway tracks, okay, the other assets that are there like the electrical poles, we can elevate the tracks which is above the flood levels to prevent the water damage, okay. We need to make use of drone technology to do real-time monitoring of the railway tracks also. Okay, weather forecasting model should also be integrated so that we can take timely actions also. And we need to upgrade the infrastructure so that the infrastructure when it comes to railways is climate resilient. Okay, and in this respect, we should use the advanced technology as well. For example, weather forecasting, drone technology, and the advanced engineering also. Okay, all the steps would enable us to realize the idea of decarbonizing Indian railways, making Indian railways to go green. Based on this discussion, please try and attempt this particular practice question. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, the second topic is basically referring to missing women in India. This particular topic we can associate with GS paper 1, issues related to women. So what has happened currently? The Registrar General of India has highlighted the gender imbalance which is there across different states and union territories in its Civil Registration System report of year 2023. Now, the first thing that we'll be understanding is what do we mean by this term missing woman and how it is different from the term women reported missing. When I talk about women reported missing, that means such women have disappeared and we are not aware about her well-being and where she is currently. Okay. But when I talk about missing woman, this term was basically given to us by the renowned economist Amartya Sen in 1990s. This basically refers to the number of girls and women below the age of 25 who would have been alive today if they were not aborted as fetuses. Okay, so it basically refers to gender bias in mortality. And why we are witnessing some of the reason quoted by Amartya Sen were sex selective abortions, meta-son preference, and gender biasness when it comes to access to healthcare, education, and nutrition. Now, going by this particular report released by the Registrar General of India, which functions under Ministry of Home Affairs, as you can see, when it comes to sex ratio at birth, which is defined as the number of female births for every 1000 male births, it is highest when it comes to northeastern states like Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, then you have Tripura, and the lowest ratio is in Jharkhand, then Bihar, then Telangana. Why I am referring to this thing, you will understand. Now let's look into further reasons. Why are we witnessing female infanticides when it comes to India? One of the reasons given by the Economic Survey of 2018 was unwanted women. This term was mentioned in this year Economic Survey, okay, 2018 Economic Survey. It basically refers to the daughters which belong to the parents which were actually hoping to give birth to a son, but they actually gave birth to a daughter. So since they didn't wanted this girl child, that is the reason such, girl child face gender biasness when it comes to access to food, when it comes to access to healthcare, when it comes to access to education. And that also adds to the gender biasness when it comes to mortality also. Because when you will not be getting adequate food, if I am suffering from some sort of illness, if my parents are not going to invest in my health, obviously I would not be surviving long. Other reason being meta-son preference. See, when you hear such issues, the first thing that comes to your mind is patriarchy. But when you are writing an answer when it comes to Indian society, you need to break down into different layers. Okay, so meta-son preference, we all know what do we mean by meta-son preference. Basically, nowadays the parents want son only instead of girl child. And why this is common when it comes to Indian society? Because the parents have this notion that it is the son who would be taking care of them in the older age. Because when it comes to females, they would be married and they would be living with her in-laws, not with the parents. But it is the son who would be living with them and would be taking care of them in the old age. And it is also because of gender-based socialization. From the childhood, right from the childhood, in India, the girls are socialized to perform care roles, okay, taking care of elderly, taking care of the newborn babies, doing the domestic works, etc. And the boys are socialized for instrumental role. That means they are the one who have to earn money for the family, okay. This is the reason why we are witnessing meta-son preference when it comes to India. Then, it is also a result of the social practice like dowry. Now, why parents do not prefer a girl child? Because they think that they have to invest in a girl child education also. If the girl become a officer, then to it's fine. But if even after investing so much of money in her education, if she could not get a reputed job, then they have to bear additional expenditure in form of dowry. Despite having adequate laws in place, we are not able to address this evil practice. Now, it is also on account of various cultural factors. Now, when you look into the Hindu society, therein it is the son who has to perform the last rites of the deceased parents, okay? Like lighting the funeral pyre, scattering their ashes into the Ganga river, etc. That is the cultural reason why Hindu families basically prefer having a son child, okay? And this is validated by this Pew Research Center data analysis. It has pointed out that between 2000 to 2019, you can see that majority of the missing girls is from the Hindu religious community. It is basically because of various cultural factors. Then another cultural factor is the family lineage, from whose side we are, tracing our ancestors. If you are getting your surname from your mother's side, okay, or you are inheriting the property from your mother's side, then that society would be referred to be as matrilineal society. But if you are getting your surname from your father's side and you are inheriting the property from father's side, such kind of societies are basically referred to be as patrilineal societies, okay. And herein, in patrilineal societies, what we have witnessed is the sex ratio at birth is quite skewed, as we have looked into in this particular picture also. In northeastern states, wherein we have matrilineal society, majority of the tribes have matrilineal society. That is the reason you can see that sex ratio at birth is quite good, okay, in northeastern states. But in patrilineal societies, we witness skewed sex ratio at birth. Then, for protection of ancestral property also, parents prefer having son child, okay, because majority of the societies in India are patrilineal in nature and they don't want to give their ancestral property to the girl child. Then there is widened misuse of the technology. Nowadays we have the technology that before birth you can get to know the sex of the unborn baby, and majority of the medical professionals are not adhering to medical ethics, and that is the reason we are witnessing misuse of this particular technology. And due to this misuse, the Pew Research Center has carried out the analysis, and according to it, roughly 9 million females we have lost between 2000 to 2019 merely because of misuse of this technology. Then economic factors are also at play. Nowadays, because of inflation, the cost of raising a child has increased manifold. So because of higher cost of living, parents are preferring having only 1 or 2 child. So when the parents prefer having fewer number of children, they prefer to have 1 son and 1 daughter, and that is again leading to the phenomena called meta-son preference. Now, what all steps the government has taken to basically address this societal behavior? So, we have taken adequate legal measures. In order to prohibit sex determination before birth, we have put in place the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act of 1994. Then, in order to reduce the economic pressure on the parents related to dowry, we have put in place Dowry Prohibition Act also. Then, in order to address the societal attitude towards, female childs, we have carried out various initiatives. Like, we celebrate the National Girl Child Day every year on 24th of January, and this, initiative we started way back in 2008. Okay, wherein through the celebration we are trying to address the societal attitude when it comes to the female child. Then we have Beti Bachao Beti Padhao scheme, which was launched way back in 2015, and its emphasis is basically to reduce sex selective abortions and to promote the educational empowerment of the girl child. Then we have Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, wherein various tax incentives have been provided to the parents who are investing in the name of the female girl child. They the interest that you are earning on this Sukanya Samriddhi account, that is not taxed at all, and this is being done so that one-time burden the parents do not have to face when they have to finance the education of the girl or when they have to meet the marriage expenses. So various tax incentives are being provided by the government under this particular scheme. Then in Haryana, recently the Haryana government has formed the task force which is ensuring strict enforcement of this particular act. Okay, and under this 300 medical termination centers in Haryana their license have been revoked. Then we are providing the counseling services also with the help of Ashas. And the Ashas are basically providing this counseling support to those pregnant women who have one or more female child. Then what all steps more needs to be taken? So in this respect, firstly, just like Haryana, we need to effectively implement these legal measures that we have put in place. Okay, and just implementation of laws would not be sufficient. The medical professionals need to adhere to media ethics as well. Okay, then personalized support should be provided by the Asha and the Anganwadi workers. We should start gender sensitization right from the schools. So gender sensitive curriculum should be started right from the primary level, so that we can change this gender based socialization that women are there to perform only care roles and males are basically there to perform instrumental role. We need to change this now. Then we need to move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. Right now, you are seeing that we are coming up with the data facts with respect to the year 2023 and we are currently in 2025. So this is the gap in real-time data. So in order to move in the direction of evidence-based policy making, we need real-time data, and it should be coming with respect to district-wise also, so that we can effectively understand that what all problems are there and what are the reasons that the sex ratio at birth is skewed when it comes to a particular district, and accordingly, based on the data, real-time data, the government can take proactive measures. Then we need to reduce the perceived cost of raising the girls. For this, the government needs to come up with more, schemes like Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao. Okay, so such kind of schemes should be further released by the government so that the cost of raising a girl child could be reduced manifold for the parents. And lastly, we can come up with a cradle scheme, wherein if a parent don't want a girl, this would be a transformative step, especially when it comes to unwanted girls. So if you don't want a girl child, instead of killing the baby, just give it to the state, and state should take the responsibility of all her expenses, education, etc. And last but not the least, we need to make sure that the girl child is educationally empowered. Only then we can make sure that it would be financially empowered also. We need to address this thing. Currently, women are mostly working in the agriculture sector or in the informal sector. So government need to come up with adequate policy so that more and more women enter into the formal sector, okay, and they get better salaries. Until unless we don't ensure educational and economic empowerment of the women, we would not be able to effectively address this societal mindset when it comes to the female girl child. And lastly, you can end the answer by quoting this thing, that female feticide is not just a crime, it is a reflection of the societal imbalance. Okay, so just mere implementation of the laws would not be sufficient. We also need to bring the shift in the societal attitude. Okay, and for this, as I mentioned, the media professionals also need to adhere to their professional or the medical ethics. That's it. We have a PYQ on this particular line, so do practice this. And I've also framed a practice question for you people, so do practice this particular question. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now, beginning with the simplified section, recently the Supreme Court has ordered the CBI to carry out the inquiry when it comes to the stampede incident which took place in Tamil Nadu. This particular topic we can associate with polity section of our prelim syllabus, and you can also relate it with GS paper 3 disaster management section. So terming the stampede incident which took place in Tamil Nadu Karur region as the one that shook the national conscience, Supreme Court has ordered the CBI to carry out the inquiry in this respect. Now the first thing that we need to understand is what is stampede. It basically refers to disruption of orderly movement of crowds, which actually leads to death and injuries to different people. This disorderly movement of crowd is, usually in response to perceived danger, loss of physical space, etc. Now recently, we have witnessed a lot of deadly stampede incidents in India. In June 2025, when the RCB won the IPL match, in 18 years for the first time. Then in the Chinnaswamy Stadium in Bangalore, we witnessed stampede incident. Then in February 2025, we witnessed stampede incident at the New Delhi railway station, because there was a huge crowd of passengers who wanted to attend the Kumbh Mela, Mahakumbh Mela. Then in January 2025, we witnessed stampede at the Sangam area of the Mahakumbh, because everybody wants to take a holy dip on the occasion of Moni Amavasya, which is a auspicious day when you go by the Hindu calendar. Then in December 2024, we witnessed stampede when Allu Arjun was doing the screening of his film Pushpa 2. So like this, we have witnessed various stampede incidents in past. You can refer to this particular pictorial. Now in this respect, the National Disaster Management Authority has given certain guidelines that how we can make sure that we don't witness such deadly stampede incidents. So for this, firstly, the officials need to understand that what kind of event it is going to be. Is it a religious event, or it is a sport related event, or it is a political rally? So we need to understand what is the kind of event, then what crowd you are going to expect. So obviously in screening of a particular film, there would be huge crowd. So in that respect, you need to understand that what would be the crowd that is expected, what would be the age profile, what would be the gender, and accordingly you need to make the management. And what is the motive of the crowd, like when it comes to the Moni Amavasya, the stampede incident that we witnessed at the Sangam area of Mahakumbh, therein the motive was basically to get a dip, in the holy river. So you need to understand that for what purpose people are coming, and accordingly you need to do the arrangement. You know that people are coming here to get a holy dip. So when it comes to, getting a holy dip in the river, accordingly the official needs to do the crowd management. So that one by one people should go and do the holy dip. Then in order to effectively manage the crowd, you need to, take into account how many personals you are having, what all space it is, available to carry out that particular event, what all makeshift infrastructure we have put in place. We need to put in place adequate entry and exit, gate should be there. So all these things should be taken into account. And when it comes to official, they should also be trained effectively when it comes to the crowd management. So venue should be looked into, and the other stakeholders, they should also be taken into account, so that we can effectively do the crowd management. Now, having understood this thing, let's just look into certain pointers with regard to CBI. So this body was created in 1963 by a resolution of Ministry of Home Affairs, and it was created based on the recommendation of Santhanam Committee. It is not a constitutional body, and it is neither a statutory body. It derives its power from the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act of 1946, and it is currently working under the Ministry of Personal Pension and Public Grievances. It is India's nodal agency when it comes to coordinating the investigation on behalf of Interpol member countries. When it comes to composition of the CBI, we have a director which is appointed based on the recommendation of 3-member committee, okay, which have PM as the chairperson, the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, and the Chief Justice of India or a Supreme Court judge. When you talk about the tenure of the CBI director, according to the CVC Act, it was 2-year maximum tenure. But when we did the amendment in Delhi Special Police Establishment Act way back in 2021, through this amendment, now it is possible for the government to increase the tenure of CBI director, okay, from 2 years to 5 years. But at one time, the government can increase the tenure by 1 year at a time, okay. Then when you talk about the powers and the function of this particular body, so when it comes to investigating a crime, central government can authorize the CBI to investigate a crime in a state, but only when the concerned state has given its general consent, okay. And this general consent thing is mentioned under section 6 of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, okay. Then when it comes to, certain states like West Bengal, Rajasthan, they have withdrawn the general consent. Now, what does this mean? This means that now if the CBI has to carry out any inquiry in these states, it need to get the consent from the state for case-to-case basis, okay. And it has a suo motu investigating power when it comes to inquiring the cases in UTs. But it does not require the consent of the concerned state if the order has been, the inquiry orders have been issued by the Supreme Court or the High Court, like what we have discussed in the particular scenario, okay. It can investigate a crime anywhere in the country without the consent of the concerned state. That's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, the Nobel Prize in Economics have been awarded to 3 people for giving an explanation that how innovation drives economic growth. This particular topic we can associate with the economy section of our prelim syllabus. So, this has been given to Joel Mokyar, Philippe Egoin and Peter Howitz for explaining innovation-driven economic growth. And they would be receiving a prize money of worth 11 million Swedish kronor, okay. Now, what these 3 people has actually described for them, for what they have got the Nobel Prize. So, when you talk about the Mokyar, he basically used the historical sources to uncover the causes of sustained economic growth in the world. But when you talk about the other 2 winners, they actually use mathematical models instead of looking into past data. And they highlighted that how a decision taken by an individual or an individual firm actually drives economic growth, okay. How it drives innovation culture and how it give a boost to the economic growth. And their work actually provides an explanation that how previously economic stagnation was a norm, but that is not the case nowadays. Why it is so? Let's try and understand. So, if you look at this chart 1 here, it shows that previously economic stagnation was the norm, okay. But since 2000, what we are seeing is economic stagnation is no longer a norm. The reason given by these 3 people is basically the innovation-led culture. So, in the initial stages when, before industrial revolution, what we witness is propositional knowledge. What do we mean by propositional knowledge? Wherein you know that how things are working, but you don't have the answer to why things are working. For example, if I know that how I am supposed to use the ChatGPT, but I don't know that how I can further improve the functioning of ChatGPT or the AI powered models. In that case, I would not be able to make the model better and better, okay. So, that was the knowledge that we have, okay, prior to industrial revolution. But when the world witnessed scientific revolution, we started to understand, we got the answer to both how things are working and why things are working. And that is the reason we were able to make the machinery effective, okay. And that is something that we witnessed with respect to steam engine. And because of this knowledge, okay, which according to Mokyar basically led to advances in the steel production, because we started to understand that how oxygen reduces the carbon content of molten pig iron. But according to Moquet, this how and why is not enough. The third element that is also needed for the innovation culture to drive economic growth is society's openness to change. And this is basically referred to be as process of creative destruction. This term was given by the economist Schumpeter in 1942. Now, what is this process of creative destruction? Whenever a new technology would be coming, it would be benefiting few and it would be, leading to losses for some sections of the Indian society. For example, when computers came, okay, it gave a boom to the IT sector, but it took away jobs of various sections of the Indian society. But then, the society needs to be open for this particular destructive change, okay, creative destructive change. Only then we would continue to innovate, and then only the innovation would be able to give a boost to the economic growth. Now, when it comes to the other two people, okay, Egon and Howitz, I'm sorry if I'm not able to pronounce these names, okay, so they basically, instead of looking into past, figures, they basically make use of mathematical models. And by using this mathematical model, what they point out that how the decision taken at a firm level is going to give a boost to innovation culture, and how that innovation culture is going to give a boost to the economic growth. Okay, they explained it with the help of patent rights. Now, the company who is, let's suppose, coming up with a new medicine, it knows that because of this patent right thing, if it is going to come up with a new medicine, it would be enjoying the profits, okay, for a longer period of time. But this patent right do not protect you from competition. Now, another company cannot produce the same medicine, but it can come up with a better medicine. That's how innovation culture, okay, which is happening at a firm level, give a boost to the economic growth. Further, these two people pointed out that money for investment in these research and development activities is basically originating from where? From the household savings. But these household savings are in turn dependent upon the interest rate. So these two people basically came up with the first macroeconomic model for creative destruction, wherein they talked about the general equilibrium in three things, okay? In financial markets, basically with respect to interest rate, in investment when it comes to R&D sector, and when it comes to household savings, okay? One more thing that you need to understand is when it comes to the Nobel Prize for economics, it was not started giving, okay, in 1901 when the other Nobel Prize were given. We started giving the economics related Nobel Prize from 1969, and the first economists who were, awarded with the Nobel Prize in economics were Ragnar Frisch and Jan Tinbergen. One more thing that we need to understand is what is going to be the policy implication of this particular finding. So now the government would consider that whether it should subsidize the R&D, okay, expenditure when it comes to companies. Only then we will be able to give a boost to the innovation culture and ultimately giving a boost to economic growth. You can very well understand China has emerged as a, manufacturing hub. Why? Because it has given boost to R&D. So today, if you want to increase your, GDP growth rate to many-fold, you need to invest in the R&D. And when you talk about India also, the World Bank has also pointed out that if India wants to, come out of the middle income trap, then in that case, we have to increase our R&D expenditure. We have to create an innovation culture. Okay, so these are going to be the policy implications. So government would be considering that whether it should subsidize the research and development expenditure or it should make the society ready for creative destruction process, okay, by subsidizing social welfare or by creating adequate social safety net, okay, for the people who would be losing because of the new emerging technologies. Okay, that's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, various hostages have been released by Israel and Palestine, okay, following the peace summit which took place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. This particular topic you can associate with the prelims events of international importance. Now, the Donald Trump has declared that the war in Gaza is over as he head to the Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, wherein the peace summit with respect to this Gaza war was going on. And because of this particular summit, the Israel has released certain hostages and Palestine detainees. Okay. But this particular peace summit has not addressed various crucial questions. What are those crucial questions? That whether Hamas group would be giving up arms, and what about the security guarantee for Gaza, the people who are living in this particular region? Then who is going to take the responsibility when it comes to rebuilding the Gaza region? And who is going to take the responsibility and who is going to provide the aid when it comes to ensuring rehabilitation of the displaced people? The bigger question which this peace plan has not talked about is who will be governing the Gaza region? If not Hamas, if not Palestinian authorities, then who is going to govern the Gaza region? In the Donald Trump, peace plan that is there, it has made a very vague reference to Palestinian statehood, but no tangible commitment has been made in this particular respect. So all these crucial questions go unaddressed when it comes to the peace summit that took place. Now, there are other issues also with this peace plan. When it comes to discussing this peace plan, there was absence of common Palestinians. Their voice has not been heard when it comes to, drafting this peace plan. Then what happens if Hamas group refuse to disarm themselves and they refuse to give up their control over Gaza? So this ceasefire would be only temporary in nature then. And this has ignored the issue of Israel's occupation of Palestinian authorities. And the world's leaders and the countries have done nothing in this respect. But there are certain positives also. The Donald Trump has leveraged his relation with the Israeli Prime Minister, that is Benjamin Netanyahu. And he has used it many times. For example, he has forced the Israel Prime Minister to accept this deal. Then when the Israel was engaged in a war with Iran, at that time Trump ordered the Israel to call off an imminent airstrike, and Israel did follow the Trump orders. And when it comes to Israel attack on Qatar, in that respect, because of the pressure from Donald Trump, the Israel Prime Minister did admit that Israel has violated Qatar's sovereignty and it would not be doing so again. Now, the last thing that we need to understand with this, with respect to this Trump 20-point plan is it going to really work out? The experts are not very optimistic in this respect. Why? Because Trump is disinterested. He was doing all this in order to get the Nobel Peace Prize, but it has been given to Venezuela opposition political party leader. Okay. Then when it comes to Netanyahu, he is also not interested in adhering to this, 20-point plan. Why? Because if he does so, then the corruption probe will begin against him. And ultimately, the experts have pointed out that the Israeli Prime Minister, what he'll be doing, he would allege that Hamas did not adhere to this particular peace pact, and again he would start the war on Gaza. Another important thing that we need to understand from Film's perspective is this particular region which is in news, Sharm el-Sheikh from Egypt. So it is a town near the southern tip of Sinai Peninsula. As you can see, this is Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, and here we have Sharm el-Sheikh. It is in this particular city we have thriving hospitality industry, okay, and that is the reason it is the ideal place for a lot of international gatherings as well. And Israel's only direct access to Red Sea lies through Straits of Tiran, okay, as you can see in this particular picture. Here, somewhere here we have Iran, and this is Strait of Tiran, and here we have Red Sea, okay. Then when you talk about the history of this particular town, it was previously conquered by Israel during the Suez Crisis of 1956, and for some time it was monitored by the UN peacekeeping forces. Again, it was reconquered by Israel in 1967 during the 60-day war, and it was held by Israel till 1982, and then the control came with to the Egyptian government, okay. And at that time, the Egyptian president basically referred this particular city as the city of peace, Now, this particular region, why we need to make note of this is because a lot of international conferences has took place here. Like for example, Israel-Palestine peace talk way back in 1999 took place in this particular town. World Economic Forum, okay, carried out a lot of its conferences on Middle East and North Africa, okay, these 3 years. These conferences were basically discussing that how we can promote peace in this conflict-ridden regions and how investment and economy could be given a boost when it comes to these regions, okay, which are there in Middle East and North Africa. And then COP27 also took place in this particular region only, wherein loss and damage fund was established, which is basically a financial mechanism which would be helping the developing countries to cope with the severe and unavoidable consequences of the climate change. Okay, so that's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, based on the data fact released by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, what we can see from this very figure is that the retail inflation has come down less than 2%. This particular topic you can associate with the economy section of our prelim syllabus. Why I am emphasizing upon this 2%? Because when it comes to the Monetary Policy Committee, it has been given the task that it has to make sure that inflation remains within a bandwidth of 6% to 2%. And currently inflation is less than the lower limit, that is 2%. Why the inflation, retail inflation has come down to such an extent? It is because of the reduction in prices of food items, okay, and the beverages. And certain experts have pointed out that the food inflation would remain, within the limit because of the good monsoon that we have witnessed. But there are other experts which have pointed out that this might not be the scenario. We might witness increase in prices of the food items because of heavy rains in certain regions, because of late withdrawal of monsoon, which basically increases the risk of crop damage, okay, like increased rainfall in West Bengal, etc. And we are witnessing persistent, high prices of edible oils. And when it comes to the domestic scenario, the situation is not good because of the weak sowing patterns. Import dependence is still high. And when you look at the global level also, the price of edible oil is quite high. Then when it comes to clothing and footwear category, therein also we have witnessed that the inflation is coming down. That means the price of clothing items and footwear item is coming down. But the news is not good when it comes to the intoxicant substances and when it comes to the housing sector. In these two sectors, we are witnessing rise in prices. Now, since the inflation has fallen down to this particular level of 2%, so experts are optimistic that in the upcoming Monetary Policy Committee meeting, the policy rate might be reduced. Okay, so there are hopes in this respect. Now, various times we have discussed CPI and WPI. So today I have decided to discuss that what do we mean by inflation, and we will be discussing the terms related to inflation. Okay, like what is deflation, what is disinflation. Now coming to inflation, inflation basically refers to sustained increase in prices, okay, over a period of time. So it's not like the price of a particular stock went up today and next day it is coming down. We cannot term it as inflation. There needs to be increase in prices of goods and services over a period of time. Okay, and whenever there would be inflation, the purchasing power of the money would come down. Now, what is this purchasing power? Purchasing power basically tells me that if I have a 100 rupee note, how many goods and services I can buy with this 100 rupee note. Let's understand this concept with the help of example. Let's suppose in year 2024, price of 1 kg of onion was 50 rupees. So if I had 100 rupees, how many quantity I could buy? I could buy 2 kgs of onion. But in 2025, if the price increased to 200 rupees per kg, now I am only able to buy half a kg. So this implies what? That whenever there would be increase in prices, the amount of good that you can buy, that would reduce. Okay, that is what is the concept of purchasing power, and it has an inverse relation with inflation. Now let's just understand what is this term deflation. Just like inflation, wherein you are witnessing sustained increase in prices over a period of time, deflation is exact opposite, wherein we witness sustained fall in prices. Okay, this situation is referred to be as deflation. Okay, wherein the prices are coming down. Now the term which often confuses the student, that is disinflation. Now as you can see, in both the cases, in inflation also, in disinflation also, the prices are increasing from 100, where here we have reached to 260, and in case of disinflation from 100 the price have increased to 210. Then what is the difference? The difference is the rate at which the prices are increasing. In inflation, the rate would keep on increasing. Here 10% increase is witnessed, then 22%, roughly 33%, 44%. But when you look at disinflation related figures, initially the price rose by 50%, then roughly 20%, 11% and 5%. Okay. So the rate at which the price was increasing, that is coming down. This you can understand with the help of this figure also. In inflation, the rate at which the price is increasing, that would go on increasing. Inflation does not mean that only the prices are increasing. You also need to look into whether the rate at which the prices are increasing, that is also increasing or not. If merely the prices are increasing, in this case from 100 to 210, but the rate at which the prices are increasing, if that is not increasing, instead it is coming down, like in this case, there is inflation, but the rate at which the prices are increasing, that is coming down. This state is basically referred to be as disinflation, and deflation is continuous fall in prices, okay, from 100 to 50. That is deflation. Disinflation, price would be rising, but the rate at which it is rising, that would come down. So with this, we have a PYQ. This is a very simple PYQ to address this, and let us know your answers in the comment section. With this, let's move on to the last topic of today's analysis. So recently, the Union government has found out certain issues when it comes to identification of beneficiaries done by the states when it comes to PM-Kisan scheme. This particular topic we can associate with prelims, basically important government schemes and policies. So as I told you, Union government has found out there is certain issues when it comes to identification of beneficiaries which is being done by the state government under the PM-Kisan scheme. What we have found out that on the same land, both the husband and the wife, they both are getting the benefits. This is not allowed when it comes to PM-Kisan scheme. Okay, either the husband or the wife can get the benefits. And this, we got to know when a scrutiny drive was carried out by Union Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, which is the ministry which is responsible for implementation of this very scheme also. And when it comes to such beneficiaries, okay, wherein there is error, majority of such beneficiaries we have found out in Uttar Pradesh, followed by Rajasthan and then Jharkhand. So in this respect, the Union government has given directives to the states that you please address this particular issue when it comes to identification of beneficiaries being done under this particular scheme by 15th of October. And the ministry have also identified that there are various cases wherein the previous landowner detail is invalid. Whenever you are buying a land, okay, so land transfer is happening. So in that respect, under the PM-Kisan scheme, if you want to get the benefits, you have to give the details of the previous landowner. This is being done in order to make sure that the previous landowner does not continue to enjoy the benefits of PM-Kisan scheme. But what we have witnessed in various cases, the details provided with respect to previous landowner is not accurate. And what we have also figured out that in various cases, okay, both the present as well as the previous landowners, they are enjoying the benefits of PM-Kisan scheme, which is not allowed under this particular scheme. So according to the scheme, if a land transfer is taking place after 1st February 2019, because this was the year in which PM-Kisan scheme was launched by the government. So in this respect, if the land transfer is happening after this date, the previous landowner details must be provided during the registration if you want to get the benefit of PM-Kisan scheme. Okay, in order to make sure that the previous landowner not receive the benefits of the scheme. If you are receiving the current landowner, the previous landowner should not receive the scheme. Now let's just quickly cover the various pointers with respect to this particular scheme, because it is one of the important scheme of the government. So it was launched, as I told you, in 2019, and who will be the eligible beneficiaries? So every eligible farming family is eligible to receive an annual benefit of 6,000 rupees, which would be given by the government in 3 equal installments after every 4 years. Okay, one installment would be roughly around 2,000 rupees. Okay, every 4 months. It is 100% funded by the central government. So it is a central sector scheme, not a centrally sponsored scheme. Majority of the schemes which are there in the agriculture sector, therein what we witness is the financing is done by both center and state, but in this case it is a totally central sector scheme. And when it comes to eligibility criteria, herein a landholder farmer family basically would be comprising of husband, wife and the minor children who cultivate land as per the land records of the concerned state or union territory. Certain categories of people are not allowed to take the benefit if they are institutional landholders, if they are government employees and they are receiving a monthly pension of 10,000 rupees or higher, one who has paid the income tax in the previous year, and professionals like engineers, architecture, doctor, etc. Okay, so basically the people who are earning enough, they are not allowed to get the benefits under this particular scheme. Implementing agency would be your Department of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, which basically functions under Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. Now, as per the guidelines of this particular scheme, only one member, either the husband or the wife or the minor children, can avail the benefits. Okay, it should not happen that both the husband and wife are availing the benefits. Now, it is a shining example of cooperative federalism. Why? Because in this scheme, the responsibility to identify the beneficiaries have been given to the state government, whereas the entire funding of the scheme is done by the union government. Then it is realizing the idea of inclusive growth also, because 1 out of 4 beneficiaries are basically the women farmers, and more than 85% of the small and marginal farmers are getting the benefits of this particular scheme. And herein we have also make use of technology for improving the transparency when it comes to implementation of the scheme. So here we have voice-based AI powered chatbot, that is Kisan E-Mitra, wherein the farmers can raise their grievances with regard to implementation of this particular scheme, and they can get the reply in any of the 11 languages. Okay, so currently it is supporting Hindi, English, Odia, Tamil, etc. And with the help of Common Service Center and with the help of Indian Post Payment Bank, we are able to provide the money to the farmers directly into the bank account with the DBT thing, direct benefit transfer, by linking their bank accounts with the Aadhaar. And this is possible because of the collaborative working of Common Service Centers and the Indian Post Payment Bank. That's all that we need to know in today's Analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next. So don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day, all of you.